Great. So we are connected and we are live. I see the audience trickling in. I already see around 20 plus attendees in this room right now. I'm going to wait for others to join, but those of you who are in this room right now and are able to hear me, this is a voice test as well. So through the chat, let us know the city and the country you're dialing in from. In case you're dialing in just from India, so of course, just mention the city, that's good enough. In case you're dialing in from outside of India, let us know the city and the country you're dialing in from. All right, I see some responses come in. I see Nepal, Sushri from Nepal, Rajat from Delhi, Bhumi from Surat in India, Arshika from Mumbai as well. Welcome everyone. Keep those responses coming in. We have around 125 people in this room already. I'm expecting a few dozen more to join this session before we kickstart the proceedings. So through the chat, let us know the city you're dialing in from, the city and country you're dialing in from. It's always good to know our spread and where our audience is coming from. So I see Lakshay from Unnao. I see quite a few people from Delhi, uh, Ridhima from Chandigarh, Ankur from Delhi, Ayushi from Delhi as well. Great. So the power capital of the political capital of the country. So a lot of people from Delhi. So huge interest over there. Anyone dialing in from outside of India? In case you are, let us know the country and the city you're dialing in from. It's always good to see that as well. Oh, I see someone dialing in from Italy as well. Welcome, Igor. Thank you for joining us over here in this session. Great. Okay, the responses are coming in too fast. So I'm going to stop there and kickstart the proceedings of today's session. Firstly, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone, wherever you are. Uh, as a brief introduction, my name is Sanjay Dhingra, and I'm a co-founder and the Chief Operating Officer at Seed Global Education. For those of you who have interacted with us before, you know that we specialize in connecting top schools with prospective aspirants like yourself. So we are a specialist in that particular area. Today's session is specially designed for individuals aiming to build careers in international affairs, international development, economic policy, global communication, geopolitics, public policy, and related fields with top multilateral organizations such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and similar organizations, most of whom tend to be headquartered in Washington, D.C., which is where our participating school today, the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, is based as well. They're actually a stone's throw distance away from the White House. That's what I keep hearing about. So they are right in the heart of the global geopolitics, if I can take the liberty of saying that. Today's session will cover an overview of some of the key transnational challenges which is facing our world today and how they often overlap. For example, one key trend which we'll discuss in today's session is to talk about how human trafficking, drug trafficking, religious extremism, and all of these become more pronounced and more dangerous as as the era of climate change advances. So very interconnected world. We are going to discuss all of those in today's session. Our guest speaker today is Professor Rolly Lal, who is an associate professor at the Elliott School of International Affairs, where she teaches graduate courses on transnational security, foreign policy, and international political economy as well. She's also co-chair of the Global Affairs and Religion Network, called GARNET in abbreviation. Her research focuses on organized crime, terrorism, religious extremism, human rights, China and Southeast Asia affairs, and similar allied area as well. She's an author of several books, including Terrorist Criminal Enterprises, Understanding China and India, Central Asia and its Asian Neighbors, Iran's Political, Demographic, and Economic Vulnerabilities as well, and also about the Muslim world after the 9/11 attacks. She has been a correspondent for the Japanese newspaper in the 90s and has published articles in other newspapers, like including the Financial Times and the New York Times. So, an expert in the domain, and I'm sure our audience is extremely excited to know and hear from her about this topic. Before I hand over the floor to her, I also want to take a moment to introduce Daniel Goldstein, who is an Associate Director of Graduate Admissions at the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. She has been with Elliott since 2019 and has her previous education. Her master's has been in education and human development as well. And of course, prior to joining Elliott, she's worked in admissions with various other schools as well and received her bachelor's from the University of Delaware. Post Dr. Lal's presentation and the topic and the discussion on the topic that I mentioned, we will also hear from Daniel to understand how you, if you are looking to pursue your master's in international affairs, international development studies, economic policy, and so on and so forth, then how you can secure an admission to George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs and that too with an application fee waiver. So we will understand about all of that, the eligibility criteria, requirements, scholarships, career opportunities from Daniel. But first, let me hand over the floor to Professor Lal to take us through our topic on transnational affairs for today. Over to you, Dr. Lal.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sanjay. And I am going to start off. I'm going to talk about transnational security as a whole. And after I'm done, if we still have time, we'll do some Q&A now. And then after Danielle, we'll continue with more questions and discussion. But I'm just going to start right off by sharing. Hold on. Hopefully this works. Let's go. Okay, yeah, all right, great. So first off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the setup in the world that we have and that I think helps understand transnational issues a lot better. So I call this the fishy model. So what this is about is that we have countries, and countries are all actually in some way one of these fishies. So let's say you are, a small country, like maybe Cambodia or Africa or something, a small country in Africa, like Sierra Leone or something like that. You may be the small fishy. You say, you know what, we don't get to make the rules. We just seem to constantly be being eaten by other fish. So that small fish is saying there is no justice in the world, But then there may be some fish that are like France, or let's say, mid-level countries, Korea, France, Britain, maybe Egypt. These are countries that are large enough to make some rules and have a lot of influence, but they're not the biggest fish either. They're probably doing something to some smaller fish. And this mid-level fish is going to be saying there's some justice in the world. Sometimes I eat some other fish, and sometimes I get eaten by a big fish, So take it or leave it. Then there are the big fish. The big fish are going to be, the US, maybe Russia, China. These are rule makers in the world. And they generally say, you know what? The world is a just place. These rules seem to be working. Whenever I feel like it, I just eat other fish. And so I think that's important to understand that whereas we have international law and we have an international system, in many ways, it's really the size of your fish that makes the difference of what we're talking about. So now I'm going to move over and talk a little bit about what is national security and how the concept of national security has been changing over time. When we say national security, often people instinctively say, okay, well, there's another country attacking us, or there's a threat internationally. Maybe India is thinking China or Pakistan, or the US may be thinking Russia or China or something like that. Or, so different countries are thinking, hey, how do we protect our country from a foreign threat? But some of the problems of this definition is that it's really not quite broad enough. When we talk about national security, it actually has to include both external and internal. We have to think, that is what we got wrong in past decades. We need to think of how does the domestic situation of our country, of other countries, how does that interact with our international and relations and with our foreign policy? So we can't really separate domestic security from international security. And the problem with that is that means that there is a disconnect with decision-making authority, because governments are not formulated like that. We have, for the US, for example, we have a State Department. It deals with foreign policy. And then, we have other agencies that are dealing with domestic things. And this is the same for most countries. The decision-making is split between these different departments that don't necessarily even speak that much between each other. And as a result, we can find that transnational threats can really, really be hard to combat, because we're not actually set up appropriately to address these threats. So what are transnational threats? Let's talk about that for a minute, because that's not obvious to a lot of people. We're used to the word international, not transnational. And transnational is talking about these threats that cross borders without us being able to control it. So for example, the most obvious one for all of us who've lived through the last 10 years is the pandemic, of COVID-19. It crossed borders without any authorization. As much as countries tried to close borders or check at, airports or wherever, the pandemic, this virus just did not listen. Disease is one of those issues. So is terrorism, cyber threats that go from one computer to the next. For example, warlords often are crossing the borders between different countries. Human trafficking and drug trafficking, arms trafficking, economic threats. When one country collapses, this often has an impact right away on other countries. Energy, like oil and things like that, and climate change, which I'm going to talk about some more and how it interacts. So for example, I'm going to start off with an anecdote of a true story of first of all, we know that Venezuela, for example, in South America, was a great oil producer and also had a very strong economy for a very long time. But over time, what we've seen with drought and climate change, the Venezuelan economy actually tanked. Also, you have political problems in that country that caused more crisis. But in any case, the general people on the ground really felt the drought because suddenly people didn't have their farming jobs. They didn't have the jobs that they used to have. So we have the case of this one woman, we're going to call her Maria, in Venezuela, who said, you know what, I really need to support my family. I have a child, I need to make more money, and I want to go further in life in international affairs and stuff. And so she sees a posting for a job selling phones, and all she has to do is kind of go and join these people. They're going to meet with her, they have a ticket for her, and she's going to join them and sell phones. So what happens is when she meets up with these people, they stuff her in a van, and she's pregnant, by the way. She's like 6 months pregnant, and they stuff her in a van, and then they stick her full of cocaine packets. First, they try to get her to swallow the cocaine packets, which she can't because she's very pregnant and it just won't stay down. So they strap 20 pounds of cocaine to her legs, and they put her on an aircraft headed to Hong Kong. So when she lands in Hong Kong, she is immediately caught by the authorities and put in prison. The theory is that actually she was used as a distraction and that there was a larger load of drugs going through. What we do know is that women, and pregnant women in particular, are increasingly used as drug mules in this type of case because, number one, authorities figure, not authorities, I mean the mafia authorities, figure that, that they're more likely to be getting through. They're also more desperate for money and maybe willing to take on a job like this, where this woman, they don't necessarily know that's what they're going to do, but they're desperate for money, and so they'll say yes to some job that sounds plausible, like I'm going to be selling phones in some glamorous job, but instead you end up trafficking drugs and in prison for decades. What we also know about the drug trafficking situation and how it relates to climate change is that opium poppies are more drought resistant than wheat, for example. And what that means is that in places around the world where people were traditionally growing wheat, many families may suddenly face the situation where, well, the wheat is not really growing properly. Someone is telling me I can grow these opium poppies. Fine, I'll grow some opium. And in addition, even more than the fact that opium may be a choice for actual individuals who are trying to make money, we have the issue of the cartels who are saying, you know what, all this drought is really cutting into our profits. You know, we're trying to grow opium crops, and even that sometimes isn't working because it's just too dry. So what the cartels say is, you know, the most profitable thing is to go into chemical-based production of drugs. And so we're seeing an increasing shift and push towards methamphetamines, and fentanyl. Because why? You don't have to have humans, you know, paid to go out in the field, water, crops, land. You don't need any of that. You just need production facilities, and it's quite profitable. So we're seeing this impact of climate change in both the human, interactions with drugs in terms of what they want to grow, maybe how they become entangled in drug trafficking, and also in what the cartels are pushing in terms of drug production and um, and drug trafficking. Um, Now, in addition to the whole drug trafficking arena, what we're also seeing in terms of other impacts of climate change on some of these transnational threats include things like human trafficking in other arenas. So, for example, we know that in China, for a long time, they had a one-child policy. And as a result of that, what we have found in recent decades is an enormous gap of anywhere between 30 and 60 million missing females in the population, in the demographics of China, because they were not born or they were eliminated because people wanted to have the one child to be a male. As a result of this, you now have a crisis in China where young men cannot find a bride. And as a result of that, men in rural areas in particular have to really try to think hard. Well, how am I going to find a female to get married to? The guys in the cities are doing much better at this. They say, okay, I've got a job with a big company. A lot of females will say, okay, I'll get married to that guy. Now, if you're a farmer in the rural areas of China, and again, drought is hitting your production and stuff, on top of that, there's a lack of women. Who wants to marry you? These guys are facing a crisis, right? So what we have is this case of this Chinese farmer who says, I can't find a bride. The price for trying to buy a bride in some of these parts of China can go up to $40,000, $60,000. And that's a lot of money for a Chinese farmer. But he says, okay, I've scraped together all my money. I'll pay $60,000 to this guy. I've heard he has nice brides who are from Southeast Asia, because of course China has a shortage. So there's this nice bride coming from Vietnam, let's just say, and I'm paying $60,000. So this girl comes and they get married, but what he doesn't realize and what has happened is that these human traffickers, they know that they can get $60,000 or $40,000 or whatnot from these Chinese men who are desperate for a bride. And so what do? They can't find enough women to volunteer for this, and they know this is a great profit-making venture. So they go into Vietnam, into the rural areas, and they either kidnap a woman, or they pay family members or friends to sell her to them. And now they have a female who they sell to this farmer. Now, in the best case scenario, the farmer and her stay married and so forth. But in many cases, what happens is these criminals actually know where she is, and she is a commodity. They will kidnap her back and resell her to another farmer. Now the initial farmer is out of $60,000, and this poor girl is being resold, and the human traffickers are simply making a lot of profit. So again, we're seeing this hyper powering of human trafficking as a result of the impacts of climate change, both in China for the farmer as well as in Vietnam for the rural people who are desperate enough to sell their women into this system, right? Now, what we're also seeing is the human smuggling through Libya. So As we see the climate changing around the world in West Africa, we're seeing a lot of crisis. People, again, having problems with finding profitable jobs. And so they are hearing from smugglers and traffickers, they're hearing, hey, it's profitable for you as an individual to pay us. We will smuggle you across the Mediterranean and you'll get into Italy or Greece and Europe and you're going to get a good job. So what we're seeing is these people, just trekking all the way across West Africa into Libya, where the smugglers and traffickers are using inflatable boats to take the migrants from Africa across the Mediterranean. And so we're talking about hundreds of thousands of migrants and thousands of them dying because this inflatable boat can go down anytime in the middle of Mediterranean. Many of these migrants that are headed into Libya are also tortured or sold as slaves. And we're just seeing, again, huge amounts of profit from this trade. So as we see the climate change impacts in Africa growing, we will see more of this. That's just what happens because people are desperate. They say, but even then, many of these people who have been fooled into this, after they get to Libya and see the horrendous conditions that they're being subject to, they say, if I had known about this, in advance, I never would have left. Even how miserable my life was in my origin country, I don't think I would have come for this. But again, these criminal gangs are able to use WhatsApp and other platforms to misinform people into thinking that this is going to be much easier and much better than it really is. And so that's a nexus of how technology and misinformation on platforms like WhatsApp, which are notorious for sending out misinformation from all kinds of people. So that everything is a possibility, right? Going across the continent is a possibility. Looking for information on the internet is a possibility. But there are too many possibilities, and many of them can also be threats. So people need to be very careful, and this is some of the threats that we're seeing coming out of this. Now, another issue that we see, other than the human smuggling and human trafficking and drugs, is how the climate change has impacted our food supply around the world. Now, we know that actually, I'm going to go to this food riots for a minute. We know that the increase in food prices are not felt equally around the world. Americans, for example, spend less than 10%. We spend less than 10% of our income on food. So when the price of bread in the US goes up, we just don't even notice. It does not make a difference to us. I would say that what is interesting as a result of that, and in India you would notice this more, the poorest 2 billion people, the poorest people in India, for example, in China, in even in the US, the very poorest people, and around the world, these poorest 2 billion people spend between 50 to 70% of their income on food, and that is enormous. So when you have food inflation around the world, this can cause revolutions and unrest. We know that between 2007 and 2011, food grain prices doubled, and this had to do a lot of drought and other climate situations. So the food crisis of 2011 brought with it the Arab Spring, and people initially, policymakers around the world were thrown. They didn't see it coming. They thought, oh, it's just a bread riot that's happening in Tunisia. But in actuality, this is what instigated the entire Arab Spring riots and the revolutions that took place across the Middle East. And this photo right here is, of course, of a bread helmet protester in Yemen. He's mad. It's a funny looking picture, but he's really mad. Now, also, I want to mention that this drought in the Middle East in particular has had an impact on terrorism. So we know that extremism has been able to have an increase as a result of this. In Iraq, what we have seen is that when you have the drought in Iraq and these men who were farmers, again, they, could no longer run their crops because you can see what this land looks like. It's cracked. You cannot get any, wheat out of this anymore. And so these farmers said, okay, we're going to the market on the weekend. We have nothing to sell. My family is hungry. The crops are dying. So how am I going to get food for my family? So what we saw is that Islamic State would come to the farmers markets on the weekend, and they would recruit and hand out food at the market. They'd say, here, have this food basket for your family. Here, have some cash, And some of these farmers would even say, they would admit, they say, you know what, I don't agree with the ideology of these crazy people, but I really need to feed my family. So, okay, I'll take the basket, I'll take the cash. And these people say, you know what, I have more for you. Just join us and we will make sure that you stay fed. And so, again, we see a recruitment route for extremist groups and terrorist groups who can take advantage of the enormous impact that climate change has had on these agricultural communities around the world, but in particular in the Middle East and in Africa, where people are very desperate for any alternative to what their traditional way of life was, right? Now, in addition to all of these impacts for, we're talking drugs already, refugees, extremism, human trafficking, you can see how it's just being a powerful force across the world. We know that it has an impact, as I mentioned, on organized crime. And, we often are more concerned with our morality than we are with how to solve the actual transnational threats that we're facing and the challenges that our populations are facing. So what does that mean? What that means is that we are creating larger problems in the middle of all these crises by institutionalizing our moral outrage. When we decide that drugs like methamphetamines and cocaine are dangers for public health, we are creating opportunities for the drug dealers. The drug dealers say, oh, okay, you've banned it. Well, you know what? We have an easy market that is waiting for us. We are going to be selling this, and we're going to sell it, at a good price, and we'll sell it on street corners, we'll sell it online, we'll sell it in schools, we'll sell it wherever, right? When we make prostitution illegal, we create a market opportunity for people to kidnap women and children and sell them, So by simply making it illegal, we create an entire illegal market. We think that we're stopping people from doing these things that we don't like. I don't like prostitution. I just don't like it. It's bad. I'm going to make it illegal. That does not stop an entire population of men who are looking for a woman to have sex with from paying someone to find a woman for them, right? So we are simply making a market opportunity for crime again. When we ban the sale of organs, we create incentives for the brokers between these desperate patients and the desperate donors, people who are really desperate for money and are willing to sell a kidney or another organ to make money for their family. And sometimes that doesn't go very well, right? So there are all these things, and of course when we're talking about in India nowadays, we're seeing the banning of a variety of things, and again, it's people don't like to hear it, but the fact of the matter is, as soon as you create a ban instead of a regulation, what you do is you simply create an opportunity for crime, because crime is smart. It is smarter than the government. It's smarter than the general public. They will find a way. So I like this cartoon here. In light of today's general moral outrage, we're taking devil's food cake off the menu. And this one right here, Malala Yousafzai, very courageous young lady. And she says something that's, again, very interesting. She says, what terrifies religious extremists like the Taliban are not American tanks or bombs or bullets. It's a girl with a book. A knowledge is a powerful thing. And again, it is transnational. It is something that we can spread around the world. We can spread in many ways to combat a lot of these issues that we're talking about. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the slides. And let's see, I'm not sure if we should go. I'm going to turn this over to Sanjay and say, Sanjay, should we go to questions or should we go to Danielle and then go to questions afterwards?
So either works, but I do want to encourage our audience to ask questions. I don't see any questions come in. So a quick reminder to everyone who's in this room. I know it's been a very serious topic, but very interesting and insightful as well. There's a counter view out there for quite a few aspects which Dr. Lal touched upon. So if you have any questions you want to ask, please do post them in the Q&A box. And suddenly now the questions are streaming in. Everyone's asking those questions. So I'm going to start picking them up shortly. But a quick completion of what I was saying is if you have questions for Dr. Lal, please post them in the Q&A box. You can also upvote the questions which have been asked by others. This would tell me that the question is important for many of you, and I will pick up the most upvoted questions to ask her. With that, Dr. Lal, let me take up the first question, the very first question which came from Igor. Igor, if I remember correctly, you are dialing in from Italy for this particular session, so thank you for being here. His question is, considering Russia and Ukraine being the biggest wheat exporters in the world, what impact has the war had on food prices in the global context?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Thank you, Igor. It has had a massive impact, actually. Countries like Egypt were importing, I think, 80% or so of their wheat from Ukraine. So, this type of disruption by war has had a massive impact on food prices, and these countries are very much suffering and have had to, of course, try to get wheat from other parts of the world. We are seeing inflation in the wheat market all over the world, but it's felt far more in the Middle East because the Middle East and Africa are the most massive um, importers of Ukrainian and Russian wheat. So yeah, it's hurt them a lot.
Okay. Dr. Lal, the next question I see is from JS, who's asking, how does climate change actually make global issues worse? So, a lot of issues that you spoke about, they have been around since even before the climate change crisis became as acute. So how has climate change really made it more acute, or how has it contributed to these issues?
Yeah, it's just made everything worse, honestly. It's made it worse by creating more desperate people. So while many of these issues existed before, there were maybe fewer people because there were more alternatives, especially in agriculture. You know, in agriculture, we see there was a lot more options in the past. Okay, you could be a farmer, you can grow this, that, and the other. But now we're seeing that the collapse of agriculture in many places that don't have the water supply. It's really the water crisis in particular. But in some places, it's flooding, like in Bangladesh. But we, you know, this type of collapse of agricultural communities is causing massive migration flows. Illicit migration flows. It's causing the illegal markets around the world to really, really be hyper-powered. So yeah, and it's causing a lot of conflict over water, conflict over migration. When people run across the border into your country, you're generally kind of mad about it. So yeah, it's causing a lot of problems.
Dr. Lal, so I know there are some questions coming around the course. So Shri, your question about such a course. So let me tell you that the Elliott School of International Affairs, where Dr. Lal teaches, of course, has many course options. I'm shortly gonna post a link to their course, the course options that they have. We'll also hear from Daniel, who's the Associate Director of Admissions. She will tell you about the programs they offer. These are majority of them are full-time master's programs that get offered on campus. So we will talk about those shortly. So be with us. Similarly, Ridhima, your question about opportunities post-studying such a course. I'm happy to have Dr. Lal answer, talk about career opportunities that such studying international affairs can open up for you. But we can also take this question up for Daniel shortly. Dr. Lal, if I may go and continue on this particular theme that we are talking about, there's a question which is coming up, and uh, if I can just summarize it and create a gist of it, it's about how do we solve such challenges. So if banning things doesn't work, so banning prostitution or something like that doesn't work, and these are vices or harms that we know of, And for many societies, like in India, making it legal also is not an option. Or let's take an example of drugs, right? So currently drugs are banned, so that gives to illegal trafficking or smuggling. But if you can't even make them legal, so how do you tackle such challenges? How do you resolve such issues?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And by the way, I do teach the class called Transnational Security. We do offer it, which is an excellent way to pursue this. Now, the what should we do? I believe strongly that we need to think of regulation. So rather than banning, we must think of regulation. How can the government be involved in regulating, for example, what drugs are available to whom, providing, for example, clean needles for drugs, let's say, providing actual drugs that have been vetted for having the right content, because this is the cause of a lot of death. Drugs that have been cut, opium cut with fentanyl, fentanyl cut with xylazine. These impure drugs are extremely deadly. So by leaving it to the illegal market, it's very, very dangerous for the public. It's better to actually heavily regulate. And then same thing with prostitution. Many countries have taken on legalizing prostitution, providing license, providing health checks, keeping the safety of the prostitutes, to make sure that they're not being murdered, that their health is safe, that the public is safe also from diseases being spread, and that they're receiving payment for their activities rather than having all of their payment being taken away by the criminal gangs that are owning them. So by regulating prostitution, you can actually benefit the prostitutes as well as the consumers, and make sure that you have take the money out of the pocket of crime and actually put it more in the pocket of these poor women that have to do this job. So whether it's drugs or prostitution or whatever, even migration, we have to think of how to regulate these flows rather than just saying we shut it. So, anyways, but I'm taking up too much time, so I continue.
No, this has been extremely insightful. Lakshya, Soumya, and there were a number of questions around this similar topic, similar questions. Lakshya, Soumya, Harshita, Tapita. I hope this answers your question. It gives you an indication on some of the strategies to tackle such problems and such challenges in the society. And of course, if you want to learn more, I would highly recommend taking the course, going studying at GW Elliott and understanding more about these topics and these challenges in detail. What I can do is I can take up maybe one last question for Dr. Lal before we go to Daniel and hear about the admission requirements, criteria, and scholarships. But before I get to one final question for you, Dr. Lal, from the audience, I also want to understand from you the opportunities that students or graduates of Elliott School of International Affairs can look at post them studying over there. So what, if you've seen any of the alumni or previous cohorts that you've taught, what are they doing currently?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, our students who focus on transnational security, which is what I focus on, my students often end up in government. I have a lot of American students who ended up in the State Department, or Defense Department, CIA, FBI. I have students in all areas, the Treasury Department. I have international students also going back to their countries and joining the government of their countries. Now, when let's say you have someone, I have some students who did transnational security and they're actually working for international organizations dealing with migration flows or dealing with drug trafficking or money laundering or all of these types of topics. So a lot of students, this is very useful knowledge because it's very specific. Sometimes international affairs, if you just study international affairs, it can be very broad and it's hard to actually just market being broad. So it's good to actually specialize in a subtopic. So like transnational security, then even there you can dig down, and while you do a focus on transnational issues or security studies, you can say, okay, well, I know a lot about drugs now, and then I'm going to go work for drug enforcement. Or I know a lot about human trafficking. I'm going to go work in that. So it actually helps you become more marketable because these are all very, very concrete job areas. Also, NGOs are often working in these areas as well as government areas and international organizations. So there are, and banks. I have multiple students who focus on money laundering, which is also an area in transnational security, and they actually work for banks or government financial institutions to work on catching money launderers.
The last audience question, which I want to pick up before we go to the admission segment of this entire interaction. And this is a question which has come up from Aniket. And the question is that can such issues be tackled by a higher GDP? So I'm summarizing his question, but can these be tackled by a higher GDP growth rate so that there's more employment, more people being productively employed or engaged in the economy, and that can address such issues? So for example, if I take the example of India, with a massive growing population, you know, a lot of youngsters joining the work eligible age every year. Is a higher GDP rate a solution to that? And if yes, then wouldn't that again continue contributing to the climate crisis?
No, it's a great question. Yes, higher GDP does help bring more people into legitimate jobs and be less susceptible to these type of criminal or terrorist enterprises. However, yes, as you have increased GDP growth, again, you need to think about regulation and how to do this in a climate acceptable way. So, for example, reducing emissions in terms of cars, maybe having some sort of incentives to people using either low emission cars or high occupancy vehicles or bicycles, for example, things that will help the climate. Being more, strict on things like crop burning at certain times of years, which is where I know New Delhi is facing some serious problem with crop burnings causing pollution. But then there's also things that are very population centered, burning firecrackers at the festivals like Diwali and so forth. I mean, it's something that people have to come together and say, okay, you know what? Maybe there's another way that we can celebrate that is better for our environment, that we can all live with, and we won't have to send the kids home from school, So I think as population growth happens, that also increases our economic ability to do things in a climate positive way, because now we have the money to do it. You don't have to say, oh, well, I don't have the money to do this in a way that's clean for the environment. You can say, you know what, we have the money to invest in this. Let's try to do it cleanly. But simply having GDP growth is not going to solve all these problems. You literally have to regulate, because crime, like I said, is smarter than the government, smarter than your typical person. And it will find a way if you don't have the proper regulations. If you continue banning these things, even if you have a strong GDP, you will have an illicit market and terrorists and criminals taking advantage.
Thank you for those insights. I see a number of thanks coming for you for your answers in the chat. Those are just for host and panelists, so the audience can see those responses, but I do see a number of thanks coming in over there as well. Dr. Lal, if you're comfortable being around for a few minutes, what we can do is finish the admissions presentation and then you with more questions. Would that be okay? Great. With that, to the audience, a quick reminder, I want to invite Daniel Goldstein to this session now and to take over the screen share. Daniel is an associate director with the admissions department of Elliott School of International Affairs. She would be able to tell us about the various programs that the school offers, the eligibility criteria, the scholarships that the school offers, plus also how you can secure an application fee waiver in case you're looking to apply to the school and to one of its programs for the 2025 intake. With that, over to you, Daniel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sanjay. So as Sanjay said, my name is Danielle Goldstein. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Admissions at the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University. And if you enjoyed Professor Lal's session and can see yourself taking that transnational security class with her as an Elliott School graduate student, I'm excited to provide you with some more information about our school and how you can become a student here. So I'll start off by talking about the options that you'll have in terms of the programs that we offer. So the Elliott School offers 8 Master of Arts programs. We have 2 specialized master's degrees, 2 joint degree options, and starting next year, we're actually going to be offering a brand new STEM designated MS in International Economic Policy that can actually be completed in about a year and a half. So we're excited for that new program. All of our programs are interdisciplinary and cover a wide range of topics. Each program offers between 4 and 15 concentrations that students can choose from, and some programs allow students to choose multiple concentrations or even create your own. So you have a lot of flexibility to customize a program based on your specific interests. Here are some of the strongest features of our school that you'll find across all of our programs, all of which contribute to the value of your Elliott School degree. One of the biggest keys to our entire student experience framework is the flexibility that we have built into your degree program. So we offer both a fall and a spring start. That's a January and an August start, which means you can start your program whenever the time is right for you. Next, I want to talk about why we offer all of our courses in the evenings. So our programs are built with students' best professional interests in mind. We want students to be able to take advantage of our unique location. All of our courses start at 5 p.m. or later in the evening, so students have the opportunity to work, hold an internship, or volunteer during the day, and then make it to class in the evening pretty easily. The capstone experience is probably going to be one of the most memorable and impactful parts of your studies because of how it brings together everything you've learned and applies it in a really hands-on, real-world scenario. So the capstone course is typically completed over 2 consecutive semesters. You'll sign up for a class based on a thematic topic that could be something like foreign policy or international security. You'll form small groups of 3 to 4 other students and formulate a research proposal. And then you'll work with an actual outside client to determine your deliverables. The skills that you develop throughout this process and by completing your final research paper and presentation all prepare you for employment immediately after graduation. And lastly, another favorite element that all of our programs share is our skills courses. These courses are built around feedback that our Graduate Student Services Office receives from surveys that are sent to both domestic and international employers. These courses allow students to stay up to date on the skills that those employers are looking for in competitive candidates for the career and internship positions that they hold. The Elliott School is in a unique location, like I said, and I don't just mean that we are in Washington, D.C. We are, in fact, right across the street from the State Department. We are about 2.5 blocks from the White House, as Sanjay said earlier. You keep walking past the White House, you'll find the USAID headquarters. Students with internships at the World Bank or the IMF can make it to class in about 5 minutes. They're just a couple blocks in the other direction. So a lot of schools point out their DC location, but the Elliott School is truly positioned perfectly among the landmark centers for international affairs. And that has a huge impact on the kinds of speakers and events and access that the Elliott School and our world-renowned faculty can connect you with as a student as well as an alum. All right, so as you've probably already discovered, a graduate education of the caliber that you'll get at the Elliott School is a really significant investment. So I'm sure you have questions about fellowship opportunities and other ways to reduce your tuition expenses. So here you can see the deadlines by which you'll need to submit your application in order to be considered for Elliott School graduate fellowships. If you're applying for our fall term, which starts in late August, you'll want to submit your application by January 7th or November 1st if you want to find out your decision early. If you're applying for the spring semester, which starts in January, you'll want to submit your application by October 1st. And all you need to do is submit your admissions application and all of your materials by these deadlines, as well as indicate on your application that you want to be considered for fellowships, and we will automatically consider you. So this doesn't require any additional application in order to be considered for Elliott School fellowships. Do keep in mind that we offer partial tuition scholarships at the Elliott School. It's typically between $2,000 and $10,000 per semester. We don't have any full tuition scholarships. And so because our fellowships only cover part of tuition, we strongly encourage you to look for additional fellowship opportunities outside of the Elliott Schools. So we have an office housed within GW. It's our central office of graduate student assistantships and fellowships. They offer some additional fellowship opportunities there. Now, unlike the Elliott School fellowships, these do require separate applications and they have different deadlines. So as you're exploring those options, make sure you take note of all of those application requirements as well as deadlines to make sure you don't miss any of those. You can also find scholarships and resources outside of GW. So you might be familiar with some prominent fellowship opportunities such as Fulbright, but there are tons of other opportunities out there that are worth looking into. A great resource for looking into scholarships in the field of international affairs specifically is APSIA. This is the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. Their website offers an extensive directory of resources, and they have a really great way to sort through all of those different opportunities out there to see what might be applicable to you. So really recommend taking a look there. And then finally, we do our best to provide a wide variety of graduate school funding options on our website. So make sure you click that link and review all of those resources available to you so that you have a really broad understanding of the ways that you might be able to reduce the cost of your tuition. Quickly, before I wrap up, I just want to go over our application prerequisites and required materials. The first thing to note is that some of our programs have 1 or 2 prerequisites and some have none at all. So some of those prerequisites are either foreign language proficiency or economics or both. More information about what fulfills those prerequisites and which programs have those prerequisites can all be found on our website. You will need to fill out the online application. The application fee will be waived for those of you who are attending this live info session. So once you get to the end of your application, there will be an option to request a fee waiver. And you can just mention that you attended this masterclass today, December 5th, and then it'll take us about 1 to 2 business days to approve your fee waiver. You will need to submit a resume or a CV and a statement of purpose. There are 2 prompts to choose from for your statement of purpose, which are on our website. We require 2 letters of recommendation. One should be an academic reference and one should be a professional reference. We require transcripts from all institutions that you've attended, as well as translations of those transcripts if they're not in English. Your bachelor's degree must be equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree. So we do typically evaluate most transcripts in-house, but if we're unable to determine that your degree is equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree, you might be required to provide a credential evaluation by a company such as WES. In terms of your GPA, we do not have a minimum GPA required for admission as we review applications holistically, but our average GPA for incoming students last year was about a 3.6 on a 4.0 scale. In terms of standardized test scores, most of our programs are test blind, which means we do not accept GRE scores. So you don't really have to worry about those. But finally, international students are required to submit English language test scores, and we accept TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, and Duolingo. And here are the minimum score requirements for English language tests. You can also find all of this on our website, but just to give you a quick idea, those scores are there. So we do have some time for questions now, but just in case you don't get any of our questions answered today, or if they come to you in the days ahead, please feel free to email us at esiagrad@gw.edu. We also would love for you to attend a virtual information session where we'll go a lot more into depth about all of our programs and some of the things that I talked about really quickly today. So we definitely recommend signing up for one of those. We host typically a few virtual information sessions each month. So hopefully you can find one that works well for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. That was extremely useful. I'm sure a lot of the attendees are looking to pursue such a course and further studies in the United States, especially in the domain of international affairs and allied disciplines. So we still have around 7 minutes before we need to wrap up this session. So I do have the opportunity to ask a few questions. And the most awaited question, which I want to take up now, is from Shreyan Chanda. Dr. Lal, I believe this question is for you. This is around the refugee crisis. So countries like Bangladesh are already seeing a lot of refugees linked to climate crisis in the nearby adjoining countries. And as someone who lives in, let's say, West Bengal in India, how do we look at balancing the plight of the refugees versus balancing the plight of our own citizens in the country? And how do you prioritize solving the challenges? I know not all world problems can be solved in one conversation like this, but still have some direction or some insights you have for this.
Yeah, no, that is actually that's a really tough one. It's one that many people are spending a lot of time trying to break their brains on this one because it's not obvious. It's difficult, especially when the refugees are coming from a place that's doing worse, but the place that they're going to isn't doing a hell of a lot better. And so everybody is facing challenges. We've seen a similar situation down again with Venezuela and Colombia, where Venezuelan refugees are running across the border into Colombia and other places like that. And some things that we've seen that have worked relatively well that they might want to think about are just having certain minimum sort of services that are available to both the refugees and, of course, the current residents, such as some minimum level of health care and water and things like that. Maybe some type of education or whatever. You know what? I know this is actually a lot. Saying that is already a pretty tall list. But even if you put education to the side for a minute, just getting a minimal level of health care and has, for example, in South America, we've seen that it's made a very big difference in terms of integrating communities and putting them on their feet. Because if the refugee cannot be even on their feet at all, they don't have the option to go back home, because they need to be actually healthy enough and sort of self-sustaining enough to say, oh, you know what, actually, I really want to go back home. I miss home. And they may go back. But if their situation is destitute enough, actually, the problem is that they're more likely to stay in the country that they have run to because they don't have any other option. So it's difficult, but the government of the area has to kind of think of how to be super organized about offering these type of minimum services just to keep people at a basic level of health and wellness, so that they might be able to get on their own feet and go home, or if not go home, at least be a more useful member of the new society that they've joined.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. Again, very insightful. Daniel, the next question I want to take up for you, and this is around the difference between courses in international affairs versus international relations. Are the courses really massively different? Because in India, we hear more about international relations. We don't hear so many courses around international affairs. So are they really much different? And do the career opportunities differ from for each of them?
Actually, I don't know, Dr. Lal, do you have a perspective on that in terms of the difference between those two in terms of career opportunities specifically?
No, actually, and it's a good question, because I would say that we use the two phrases very interchangeably. There are slightly different, there is a slight difference. International relations is really more talking about the relation of one country in the world with another one. So the state-to-state relations is really much more, if you have a class, for example, called international relations, it's going to focus on that interstate relationship. But international affairs is more broad. It covers, for example, transnational security, things that don't have to do with state-to-state relations. So I would say that international affairs is broader and encapsulates more. But honestly, in the US, at least, I would say that most people just use the two terms interchangeably. They just mean the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to take up a few questions around eligibility and criteria as well. Those of you in the audience, just a quick reminder, I have posted the link to Elliot's master's programs in the chat window, so the link is readily available. You can, of course, check out the website for any other short-term courses, online courses they offer, but the link to their full-time master, at least the master's programs, is in the chat window. Daniel, one question is around the eligibility for a 3-year undergraduate degree holder. In India, a lot of the bachelor's programs tend to be of 3 years duration. Do you accept them for admission, and do they need to get an equivalency done from a NACES certified agency like the WES?
Yeah, sure. So generally, 3-year bachelor's degrees from India by themselves don't usually count as the equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree. There are some 3-year bachelor's degrees in Europe and the UK. I believe it's called the Bologna process, where those 3-year degrees typically do count as equivalent to US 4-year bachelor's degrees. But usually what we see in students from India who have a 3-year degree is that they've done the 1-year master's in addition to the 3-year bachelor's, and that together is equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree. I do know that 4-year bachelor's degrees are kind of slowly becoming more common in India. So we also do see some bachelor's degrees that are 4-year degrees. Another thing to keep in mind is that we do not require that you have a specific major or area of study in your bachelor's degree in order to apply for a master's. All we require is that it's equivalent to a 4-year US bachelor's degree. But if you have a 4-year, say, bachelor's in engineering degree, that certainly would make you eligible to apply for admission to our school.
Diptesh, I hope this answers your question. Shivam's question is around the course fee. So Daniel, if you don't mind sharing, what would be the duration? What would be the fees for the duration of a course?
Sure. So tuition at GW and at the Elliott School in particular is calculated based on the cost of tuition per credit hour. So the current cost per credit hour, I believe, is about $2,180, if I'm remembering that correctly. It does go up about 2 to 5% each year. So just kind of take that into account when you do your calculations. Most of our MA programs are 40 credits. So you can kind of do that calculation, 40 credits times that 2180 or so US dollars per credit. Of course, you would only pay tuition based on the number of credits that you're registered for in that particular semester, with that being due at the start of the semester. Typically, students who enroll full-time will be enrolled in either 9 or 10 credits per semester. Yeah. I think that answers that.
Does. Daniel, one question which is coming up is around the career services. How do they get involved, how active they are, and do they really help the students with their job search?
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you asked because our Graduate Student Services Office is fantastic. So our GSS office is what we call them, brings together academic advising, career coaching, and study abroad, or we call it international experiential education. And so it's a really fantastic way to kind of get all of your needs met in one place. They work closely with one another to support you, along with your program director as well. And so what you'll do at the very beginning of your studies, sometime during your first semester, or even maybe even before you start your first semester, is you'll fill out what we call a comprehensive action plan. You'll do that in consultation with your program director, your academic advisor, and your career coach. You'll think about what you want your specialization to be if you're going to create your own or choose one of the ones that we have. Lay out all of the classes that you plan to take. Of course, this can definitely change throughout your studies, but we just want to make sure you're going in some sort of direction at the start of your studies. Your academic advisor is going to make sure that you're taking courses in whatever order you need to take them. And then your career coach is there to make sure that you're also completing activities that you need to do in order to be able to apply for jobs as soon as you graduate. So what events are you going to attend? What sort of networking are you going to do? What career workshops will you attend? And so then throughout the time that you're enrolled in the Elliott School, you'll be able to attend those sort of career workshops that we offer. We have one-on-one career counseling appointments that you can set up with your career coach. We have, they call them career treks. So once or twice a year, students will go for a week to a location. I believe they usually do 1 week around the DC area and then 1 week somewhere else like New York or Chicago, where you'll be able to actually go to places where our alumni are working and get into the workplace, talk to their HR and recruitment departments, talk to folks that are working in those jobs where you want to have employment yourself and really kind of get in there. So tons of opportunities there. And you also have access to our career coaches after you graduate. That's a lifelong resource. So if you are working for a couple of years and then decide that you really want a promotion or you want to change courses a little bit, you can reach back out to our career coaches and have another conversation about how to kind of take that next step in your career.
That's wonderful. JS, I hope this answers your question. I'm sure a lot of the other audience in this session also would have had similar questions. So I hope you found this useful. We are running over time, but I do want to take up one last quick question. Daniel, for you, this is around scholarships. So you did speak about those, but if you have the statistics handy, then what percentage of the cohort ends up getting a scholarship and what tends to be the average percentage of scholarship?
Sure. So I would say about 60 to 70% of our students are offered a fellowship. Like I said, those are partial tuition scholarships. So typically we cover anywhere between $2,000 and $10,000 per semester.
All right. And students do have the opportunity to work part-time during the day and then come for classes in the evening. So to the audience, take that into account. That is also another great opportunity to subsidize the cost of education that you
Yeah.
undertake. Great. With that, we are almost 5 minutes over time, but I still want to give Dr. Lal and Daniel some time for parting words. So if you have any advice for the audience, please do feel free to share. This session has been extremely insightful. I personally enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience has found it insightful as well. But happy to hear any last words from both of you.
My only parting advice is just please reach out to us if you have any questions or want to talk further. Our email address is esiagrad@gw.edu. Always happy to talk more. I know this is a really overwhelming process, but this is why we're here. So please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you further.
I'll just give some general advice. I would suggest, again, students who are interested in going in this field, do try to get detailed knowledge about some of these topics, try to read more, try to investigate on your own by reading a lot of news every day, and being super knowledgeable, and then also practice your writing skills. Writing very well in English is going to be very important, and speaking up, again, very important. Just as a last note, I see Stapita mentioned about climate change not being gender neutral. I'm going to say, yes, that's true. It is not. Women are disproportionately impacted. And so that is something that governments have to think about, but something that you should investigate, and you'll see all the different options that are out there. But thank you all so much. Wonderful questions. It was wonderful talking to you all today. I enjoyed it a lot.
Great. Thank you for your time, Dr. Lal, and Daniel, to you as well. And to the audience, a quick reminder, I'm sure we have not addressed all the questions that we saw today. If you have more questions, do feel free to reach out to the Elliott team. The email address was shared. In case you're unable to get in touch, or if you need any help from us at Seed Global Education, check out our website. You can also get in touch with us, and we can connect you with Daniel and her team for any further clarifications that you may have. With that, thank you, Dr. Lal. Thank you, Daniel, for taking out the time to do this interaction. It's been a pleasure to be hosting both of you today. Thank you once again. Have a great day.
Oh, thank you all.
And thank you to our audience as well. Have a great day, all of you, or great evening if you're in India. Take care.